Okay. Hello, are we on? All right. Well, good morning still. Garland Church, it is an absolute thrill for me and Maria and John to be able to be here with you today. We are your team that you sent almost exactly a year ago to Cambodia, which is a long way away. We have wonderful stories to tell you and lots of pictures, so we're going to zip through, and we really appreciate your time and attention. If you need to get a snack, get it now. Okay, so I'm Sue Frazier. This is John Noss. Excuse me. And Maria Anderson. And the three of us went to Cambodia February 15th through March 1st of 2020. Okay, so if you see the map, you see the little arrow on Spokane. So that's where we started from, obviously. We actually went across the Pacific. So we went into the time zone, and we landed all the way over in Cambodia. So to give you some idea of how far it is, Cambodia is 15 hours ahead of us, time-wise, and it requires approximately 16 to 17 hours of flight time to get there. So it was definitely a long journey. We actually lost a day going, but we regained it in Seoul, South Korea when we were on our way back. So next slide, please. Welcome to Cambodia. This is the country of Cambodia. As you can see on the, right, is Vietnam. North Vietnam kind of borders Cambodia to the east. Laos is up on top. The orange province up in the top right-hand corner is Tung Treng. That's where Joyce bases, and that's where we spent most of our time. But we also spent a good deal of time in Ratanakiri, which is the far top right, the yellow province. So we were very close to the North Vietnam border, visiting some of the little villages where we spent some of our time. So just to orient you. All right, so our flight arrived in Phnom Penh, which is the capital of Cambodia. After a couple of days of sightseeing, Joyce drove us to Stung Treng, which is about a 6-hour road trip. Most of the churches we visited were in Ratanakiri. And so next slide, I want to introduce the group. Okay, there we are. There is Cameron, who had just joined Joyce when we got there. He did not actually go with us when we went to visit villages, but we did have a chance to spend some time with him. He is an absolutely delightful young man, completely committed to missions, and is going to be a really great help to Joyce. And then you see Maria, John, Joyce, and me. Okay, so next slide, please. The first thing that Joyce did when we got there was to introduce us to some of the history of Cambodia, which really paints a picture of what the country is like. So this slide is in Tuol Sleng, S21. It's now a genocide museum in downtown Phnom Penh. So to give you just a little brief history, this is from history.com. It says Pol Pot was a political leader whose communist Khmer Rouge government led Cambodia from 1975 to 1979. So basically right at the end of the Vietnam War. During that time, an estimated 1.5 to 2 million Cambodians died of starvation, execution, disease, or overwork. This detention center, S21, was so notorious that only 7 of the roughly 20,000 people incarcerated there actually survived. The Khmer Rouge, in their attempt to socially engineer a classless communist society, took particular aim at intellectuals, city residents, ethnic Vietnamese, civil servants, and religious leaders. Some historians regard Pol Pot regime as one of the most barbaric and murderous in recent history. The bodies of many of these people were buried in the countryside in what was called the killing fields. So, to give you an idea of what this was, this guy, Pol Pot, incarcerated the top 20% of all of the Cambodian people, educators, medical professionals, business people, religious leaders. Those were the ones he killed. He had this idea that he was going to provide rice to the world, so he shipped all of the people from the city out to the country. The countryside does not support that much rice, and the people literally died of starvation. He tortured people for no reason. Many of the torturers were very young men, and he threatened them, teenagers, and he threatened them with death if they didn't do as he wanted in this prison. We were actually able to meet one of the survivors when we visited this museum. He was a man who was an artist, and the way he survived was he drew portraits of the leaders in the Communist Party, and because of that, he was allowed to live, and he lost his entire family. So a few slides from this museum. Okay, first this one shows, this is 14 graves. They're nameless graves to represent some of the people who passed away, were tortured and killed at this museum. Next slide. That's okay. Okay, this is called the Security of Regulations, and I don't know if you can read this, but basically it was the rules. Don't talk. You're not allowed to cry out when you're tortured. They beat them with electrical wires, so they got a shock in addition to being beaten. They were starved. What happened to these people was absolutely unbelievable. I mean, obviously, it touched me deeply. Next slide, please. Building A, they had cells, and they had some of the wire beds there where they had strapped these people down, and they would not allow us to take pictures. They asked that we didn't take pictures in this museum to respect the people who had died there. But basically, the first story was used for jailing, interrogating, and torturing prisoners. And there is still evidence in these cells. And honestly, when I went here, I could almost feel the essence of the terror that was in this place. But you need to understand that that is the history of Cambodia. Without educators, you can't train the next generation. Without medical professionals, there's no one to doctor. And even worse, there's no one to train the next generation. So Cambodia has been at the mercy of foreigners for many, many, many years. It is beginning to recover, but it is still basically a very third world country. And because these people have had to rely on foreigners for their businesses, for their medical, for their education, they tend to be fairly distrustful of foreigners. So we found the people to be pleasant in working with us, but they are a non-confrontational people. You don't argue with them. They don't know how to handle that, and it makes them very, very, very uncomfortable. And it was very clear that we were on the outside, and this was their country, which was fine. But anyway, so this is the first introduction we had to what Cambodia was like, and it kind of set the stage for what happened next. So the next slide, please. This is just what I call the Hall of Horror, and that's what we have on that particular topic. So the next area, we're going to talk about the ministries that we did while we were there, and Maria is going to present first.
So if you'll go to the next slide, please.
Use your microphone.
Next slide, please. This is a group of people that we met. These are Kachak people. we're white colored and we don't look like them. And so one neat thing that I tried to use as much as possible was their language. And so if we could say, "Jumriapsuat," we would greet older people with that greeting, and we would bow with respect. If it was a younger person, you'd say "Susarai," and that is hello, just a common greeting. So I found that language was just really a avenue to reach out and show these people that we cared. And we also learned some other simple phrases: God bless you, Jesus loves you. And sometimes when we butchered it and we said "Sosudai" instead of "Susadai," just a simple mistake, sometimes we would get a little chuckle or a laugh or something like that. But we just kind of did the best we could, because we did. And so we learned the word also, "somto," and that means sorry. We said that a lot. At least I did. And "akun" is thank you, and that was very helpful as well. We learned how to say bathroom, or where's the bathroom, and just water and different things. So Sue made up these really nice language cards, and I put them on the back table there if you want to go look at them and see what the words look like. Help yourself. Next slide. Okay, you can see in this picture here, we came out of the church at the end, and we took that picture and the other one previously. But you can see how big I look, okay, next to this cute little lady in the green. And they're very tiny people. The shirt I'm wearing here is a extra, extra large in Cambodia. So very small people, and you cannot tell if a person is a child or a grown-up based on their size, because you can't. I mistook a girl for a lady, or a lady for a girl. Next slide. Okay, when we came into the church, our shoes were off. We leave them outside the door in most of the places we went. Men sit on one side of the room, women on the other side. Next slide. Okay, I don't know if you can see her, but on the far left of this picture, there was a girl. I think she was about 20. And I should have known she was a woman because she was with the women. But I thought she was a girl. And so when we distributed, I didn't give her any of the things I was giving the women. And I kind of found that out later, which I felt bad about, but you do what you do. And there was a handsome guy. He's not in the picture you can see, but there was a guy to her left, so that should have been a clue to me too. So you really got to keep your eyes open and observe stuff and figure it out. Their floor is dirt, as you'll see there. And that was kind of a way the churches were. The wood, this was a very rough building that the farmers up on this high mountain where they lived and stuff. And Joyce has told in the past, if you've ever heard Joyce John speak, she's talked about the roads being just horrible. Well, we rode a horrible road to get up to this little farm village, this Kachak village in Ratanakiri. And we drove in a four-wheel drive pickup that Joyce borrowed because her pickup isn't good enough to get up it anymore. And we rode over the biggest bumps of stuff you ever saw. And when flood season comes, I can just imagine that road being completely impassable. It would just be big troughs of mud and water and just a mess. So anyway, that's where they live up here. The wind can blow through their church doors, their walls, to keep it dry or something. Anyway, next slide. This young lady you see is named Put. It's not put and it's not put, it's put, according to Joyce. So anyway, it's spelled P-H-E-R-T, which makes no sense. But she is a young lady that also works with the other girl I referred to earlier, the 20-year-old Chai. And Joyce is kind of teaching these two girls to minister to the villages by giving health lessons. And they talk about proper hygiene, hand washing, how to handle your food, all kinds of things. Don't have your chickens in your kitchen where you're preparing food, and don't have your dogs running around in your vegetables or whatever. She was just giving lessons, and it seemed like the people received that from her pretty well, and it was cool to see that. So I think that's about all I have to say on that. Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. We are in the village of, I gotta remember the name here, Lung Village Church in Bam Long. And we took a bunch of crayons and coloring books with us. In every church we went to, the kids got crayons, and they absolutely loved those things. Next slide, please. This is the church, and everybody's outside. So it's not a bad-sized church, and everybody in church sits on the sides. No one's in the middle. So it kind of feels kind of empty, but it's pretty well packed. Next slide. This is the young lady that Maria talked about, standing in front of the church. And there's people there, but you can't really see them because, again, they're off to the sides, and that's the way they kind of go to church. They all sit in the sides and leave the middle empty. Next slide. This young gentleman here was a fantastic piano player, and he knew he was cute, and the girls loved him. And the other gentleman next to him was his helper, but they sang and played the piano, and we didn't understand what they were singing, but their voices were gorgeous. Next slide. Here we have some of the elder women sitting on the left side of the church. And this is pretty much, I think, after the sermon. Next slide. I've gone to church all my adult life. I've been in many churches because I moved around with my job, and I've never, ever seen anybody do their walk with Christ and give their testimony. So we gave our testimony. So we'd say a little bit of our testimony, and Joyce would translate it. We'd say a little bit more, and Joyce would translate it until we were done. I was scared to death because I have never, ever seen a testimony, let alone given one before. So it was a challenge for Maria, Sue, and I to do that. Next slide. And here I am praying for the church. And everybody kind of gathered around for the final prayer, and Joyce is right next to me translating. Next slide. And again, children with crayons and coloring books. They love that stuff. Sue?
Thanks, John. Thanks, Maria. So just one thing I want to point out, the church that John talked about actually had pews. It was the only one that we went to. The other churches would lay out kind of woven plastic mats, and everyone sat on the floor. So this slide, this is the pastor at the church in Blang Village. So this is the third one that we visited. In this slide, the pastor is praying for us. As they mentioned, each of us had an opportunity to give our testimonies, and that's an important part of going on a short-term missions trip. Be prepared with what you want to say. We all have a story. We all have something to share. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It just has to be a way that we can speak God's name about our lives to other people. It was very, very powerful to do that while we were there. So the next slide, please. They have choirs, and these people brought up men's group, women's group, children's group, and they all sang for us in the Blang Village. They were so proud to be able to share their songs with us. So there's worship music everywhere. All right, the next slide, please. This is Maria giving her testimony. I just have to tell a little story on Maria. She was so worried about her testimony and that she wouldn't have something to say. But I want to show you the next slide. This lady on the far left was listening to Maria talk, and she was completely enraptured with what Maria was saying. She was so excited and so interested in what Maria was saying that I had to take her picture, not to be rude with Maria talking, but I just had to show Maria that, yes, she had something valuable to say because it was hard for her. So it was good. All right, the next slide, please. All right, so you have to be prepared. So when I was getting ready to go to Cambodia, God laid some words on my heart, and I have had a little experience visiting in prisons and ministry that I do at giving messages, but while we were there, the pastor at this church asked Joyce if one of us would deliver the Sunday sermon to these people. So I was ready, and it was absolutely amazing to be able to have an opportunity to speak to people, to speak God's word. And one thing I want to stress here is that we did not take God to Cambodia. God was already there in Cambodia, and what we did was join him in the work that he was already doing. To be able to participate with Joyce and to be able to share words that God had given to me that I didn't even know why, to be able to share that in a place so far away was truly a heart-touching experience for me and absolutely, completely amazing. So next slide, please. Here's part of our audience. And I had to take this picture because these people love bright colors, and I don't know if you can see, but his little shirt says Louis Vuitton, and they truly, truly love designer things there. And so I'm sure it's a knockoff, but this little guy was well dressed for the Sunday sermon. The next slide, please. Well, that's a little bit dark, but I wanted to reinforce that in Cambodia, as a sign of respect, you never wear your shoes into church. So there's all of our flip-flops and all of our shoes at the opening of the church. And they just kind of shed them as they walk through the door. Imagine how it would be if we did that at Garland. I don't know. It'd suit me all right, but it was super fun. Super, super fun. All right, next slide, please. This is where we stayed in Blang Village. So this home had belonged to some missionaries, and it was used as a temporary residence for people like us to come through. There we go back to that hospitality. Those people had provided a place for us to stay. It was actually quite lovely. Notice that the houses are built on stilts. So in the part of Cambodia where we were, and then actually in most of Cambodia, most of the homes are built on stilts because during the rainy season, if they weren't, literally there would be floodwater everywhere. And the soil there is very clay-ish, and so it becomes like mucky slime when it gets wet. So not at all what you'd want in your home. The next slide shows the interior, the living room of this home where we were. So it was nicely furnished, but I will tell you that if you stood and looked down on the floor, you could see through the floorboards. There were shutters on the windows, but no glass. So it's a country that doesn't get cold like it does here. So just boards, no insulation. But it was very comfortable, and we enjoyed our time there. The next slide.
You don't want to be last taking a shower, by the way, because it's hot and cold ice water.
Yeah, it's mostly sun-warmed water is your hot water. So here's Joyce cooking us breakfast in the little tiny kitchen, and that little stove had only a couple of burners to it, and the top came down and folded down. Very interesting place to be. But that was our home for 3 or 4 days while we were there in Blang Village. So the next slide, please. So this to me was completely fascinating. Most of you who know me know I'm an animal lover, a critter lover, and I have a home filled with them. This is the playground in Blanc Village, the main open area. And if you see that little four-legged furry guy on the side, that's the village babysitter. He literally knows every child, and he keeps them where they need to be. If little ones would wander off, he would go and find them and bring them back. The parents, 90% of the time, were not outside with the kids. So next slide, please. There he is. I tried to approach one of the children. He got between me and the kids and let me know in no uncertain terms that I was not to get any closer. So even the animals there have a role. This dog clearly knew what his role was. So they don't keep pets there like we do. This is a poor country. And if they have an animal, it's a working animal. It's either to guard a business in town. They have dogs who literally are guards for their businesses. If they have cats, they're mousers. This dog was the local babysitter, and he captivated my attention. So, John.
Next slide, please. This is in Cabal, Romeas. The government built a dam and basically flooded their village. So their homes are all government-built homes, and they're pretty much identical. And you can't see it in the picture, but to get water, they had water pumps outside along the road about every fourth or fifth house. So to get water, you've got to go outside, put it in a bucket, and take it inside the house. Next slide. This is the pasture, and this is where a baptism took place, but we had a little bit of a service before we got down to here. And he spoke pretty good English, but he did a lot better than I did in camera. Next slide. Here we are getting ready for the baptism, and if you do not like snails in your yard, not exaggerating, the snails are as big as my fists. They were huge. And I guess they ate them because they were all empty and they were just scattered all over the place. So we're kind of looking at it, Maria Sue and I are kind of looking at the water, kind of going, I'm not going swimming. It was kind of scary looking. Next slide. This man, where we had the service, came in and he's bigger than me. And he looked like a gangster. He looked like he was mad at the world. I was going, oh boy, we're going to have a fun guy here. And I was a little bit worried about him because he looked so angry. Well, he'd had a stroke and couldn't work anymore. So he was being baptized. His wife had been baptized the year before. And Sue got the best picture. When he was going in, it was only the pastor going in with him to baptize him. And he was struggling, and another gentleman finally came in and helped with the baptism. But he came up, you have never seen a smile of such joy when he came up. He was filled with the Lord's Spirit. It was unbelievable. I have never seen anything like that in a baptism before. It was phenomenal. Next slide. So again, kids in coloring. And Maria's helping. Next slide.
The slide with Maria and the kids, I again really want to stress that Maria had a real advantage. I'll take this off for a second. Because she picked up more language than we did. And it really is important to have at least a little bit of ability to communicate with the people. I don't know if I have old brain or what, but it was harder for me to remember the phrases that Joyce sent us to learn. But, can you go back one? See, she just has this ability to communicate with these little kids, and they were drawn to her. Everywhere we went, it was really fun to watch Maria and how she got along with the people because she had the language skills. So that was super fun.
Popsicles help too.
What's that?
They got popsicles from us too.
Oh, yeah, they got suckers. Yeah, a little bit of sugar goes a long way with any child. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so now that was our ministry that we did up in the villages. Now I want to give you a little bit of a cultural tour, some of the places that Joyce took us. This is called Phnom, or Wat Phnom, which stands for, Wat means temple and Phnom means mountain, so mountain temple. The predominant religion in Cambodia is Buddhist. The people are born into Buddhism, and even if they don't hold to the Buddhist beliefs, they all consider themselves to be Buddhist because their parents were Buddhist, and they're all Buddhist. So they have temples everywhere. They worship many, many different deities. Here you can see the seven-headed snake, which is one of their deities. And so next slide, please. This is up those stairs and at the top of the hill there. Again, the lion's another deity that they worship. Honestly, I don't know that they really know why they worship those things, but they have a lot of different deities that they worship. But the temples are beautiful. The people are poor, but as in most countries, they put a lot of money into their temples. Right now, this particular temple is more of a tourist area. We paid to get in to see this temple and to wander the grounds while we were in Phnom Penh. Next slide, please. This is a little altar. You see these everywhere. Sometimes people have little raised things on little poles, little altars in their yards, the people who actually practice Buddhism. This is very common to have the incense and to have food offerings, and I don't know who these deities are, but again, more different deities than that the people worship there in Cambodia under Buddhism. Next slide, please. This deity is called Aspara, and it's a deity that has to do with fertility. As you can see, the woman and the man there. Another thing that they worship. Next slide. Here's a seven-headed snake. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is the king's palace, and the king is a figurehead. It's a little bit like Great Britain, where they have a ruling party of politicians, and then they have a ceremonial king. This is the king's palace, and he definitely lives in luxury. It's kind of random when it's open, when it isn't, and we did not get there on a day that it was open, but the opulence is obvious from just even the road. So next slide, please. Language. Here we are. These are students who are studying English. They were quite thrilled to see some white faces, and they approached John and Maria and wanted to practice their English language, and they were quite friendly. And again, these are our young people in Phnom Penh. Next slide. Okay, well, you can't really see him, but there's a guy there next to the big dragon. The river behind him is the Mekong River, and he is selling bananas to tourists. Very typical vendor, meeting the need in a creative way to serve the tourists. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, this delightful thing is called a tek-tek. So in Cambodia, only the very, very wealthiest people have automobiles, or if you're foreign, most foreigners have automobiles. Most of the people have little motos, the little tiny motorcycles. They are held together with baling wire and duct tape and bubble gum, and I'm telling you, we had no idea how those little things kept running. But this gentleman, this is his taxi, and he was our taxi when we were in Phnom Penh, and he took us around to see the various sites. Now, you can see there that one of the seats faces forward and one of the seats faces backwards. So Maria learned a lesson about riding backwards in the tek-tek, because some people riding backwards get very car sick. And Maria had a hard time with that. Next slide. Here they are, smiles on their faces, seeing the sights in Phnom Penh in our fun little tek-tek. This guy had his toothbrush tucked up in one of the slats in the roof of his little tek-tek, so I don't know how often he actually got home to brush his teeth, but he was prepared. All right. That is the end of that section. John, you want to talk about Joyce at work? Thanks.
One thing we haven't talked about yet, but we briefly did, the speed limit in the country is 30 miles per hour. So that's why that journey took us 6 hours, because you don't speed and you have to have four-wheel drive. And about every quarter mile, you saw a political sign of the president and vice president. So they let you know who's running the country. This is Joyce, and she is talking with this lady about her meds. And the lady was going through her medications faster than Joyce thought she should. She was complaining about being in pain and hurting. So Joyce and her had a conversation about how often she should take her medications, when she should take her medications. And Joyce told us she thought the lady was abusing her medications. So that's one of the challenges that Joyce has, is getting the people to understand when and how to take your medication, not when you want to or feel like it. Next slide. This is outside her house, and she had a garden, but not like what you and I have. We do a garden and we'll plant a row of carrots and a row of cucumbers, whatever. They have a little thing, maybe a little circle about that big, and there's some plants in there. And a couple feet away, it'll be another little circle of rocks or a fence around it, and be some more stuff that they're growing. So their gardening is, to us, different, but to them, I'm sure it's normal. But they had their garden, and they had chickens and whatnot in the area. So they put little fences around what they were growing for food to keep the chickens out of it. Next slide. And this is one of the trees, and I can't remember why he took this picture.
That's a jackfruit.
Okay, I can see it. I'm blinded by the light. Next slide. And here we are at the hospital helping the medical school, helping Joyce with the library, because she had a pile of books and there was no order to them. So Joyce is trying to get the books in the library to be somewhat like the Dewey Decimal System, so the books are in order so you kind of know where to look for the books. The sad thing is they had computers, but the students going into illegal sites, all the computers were corrupted. So none of the computers were working. So that was part of the challenge too, is they have the technology, but they've used it incorrectly and it's no longer valuable. Next slide.
Can I just add one thing there? I wanted you to notice in that slide that those books are all written in English. So these people are Cambodian, and the textbooks that are available to them, their anatomy and physiology, their surgical nursing, all of those textbooks, they felt very happy to have the books that they had, but they're all written in English. So imagine how hard it would be to go to college and have to learn from books that are in a foreign language. Thanks, John.
And here we are in the hospital is primarily for new mothers. And again, the little baby's got the beanie and the blanket that was made here in Garland and taken over there. And this little baby was crying, and it was a couple hours old, so it wasn't an old baby. I mean, we're talking about a baby, I think it was maybe 4 or 5 hours old, and it's crying. And Joyce, well, let me hold it. So Joyce here is asking to hold the baby after she put the blanket on it. Next slide. And the baby's still crying and, you know, not too happy about being born and getting out of that little small room into this big room with all the bright lights, and it's crying and not too happy. Next slide. So I asked Joyce if I could hold the baby because it was crying still. And I'm bent over, and you really can't see it, but I'm singing Jesus Loves You, and the baby quit crying. Only makes me want to be a grandfather. My kids aren't cooperating. So, you know, we got to hold the baby, and that was kind of cool. I'm a complete stranger from a different country. I look different, and she allowed me to hold her baby. That was a really neat feeling. Next slide. There's Joyce talking to a young man, and he's been injured. He's been burned over a large part of his body. And was this a gentleman that Joyce had sex with the Lord? This is not the motor vehicle one. Yeah. You know, and this is a hospital bed. It's not like any hospital that you and I have been in. It's open, there's flies, there's geckos. You know, it's just a whole different world in their hospitals. Next slide. This originally was built to be a playground for the kids, but it was built by somebody, American or English, that did not have an idea of what the kids in Cambodia play on. So it was not used as a playground. Instead, it's an outdoor ward. These are kids who are sick with their parents, and there's no room in the hospital, so they stick them outside in what was once a playground that the kids didn't know what to do with.
John? And also, Joyce did say that normally those, we took pictures that you don't see here, but when the hospital is busy, it is like packed, and they have people out in the corridors outside of the regular hospital building. It's like an outdoor hallway. And she said that the hospital was very empty at this time, mostly mothers delivering babies and burn victims and random injuries. But when it is packed during the seasons when there's more illness going around, it is just bursting the seams of this hospital.
When we first walked in the hospital, the first thing we saw was a young mother with a baby less than an hour old in the hallway. So, yeah, Maria's right. You know, there were beds out in the hallways with patients in there, and it's kind of scary. So here's another angle of the playground, and you know they got the car tire thing and a few other things, and you can see the beds. But can you imagine being in an outdoor hospital ward when it rains and it turns to mud? Their rain is like nothing you've seen here in Spokane. When it rains inches upon inches in an hour, and it just turns into a mess. But people have to go out here because the hospital gets overflooded by the patients. Next slide.
So I asked to talk about this slide. Let's go to the next slide first, and then we'll go back to this one. So when we went, I wanted to take some tracts with us, and so I ordered these little wiggle pictures. This one says, God created us. It has man next to God. The next little wiggle shows sin between man and God. And then the third one shows Jesus on the cross between us and God. And I used this little card. It took several hundred with me and with us, and I used this card when I spoke at the church. But this card was the means to bringing a gentleman to salvation. If we could go back to the slide right before that. This man had been hit by a car as a pedestrian. He was probably out drinking, it was probably dark, but he was in really, really, really bad shape, and they did not expect him to live. And Joyce went over to talk to him, and I handed Joyce the card, and she asked the man if he had ever heard of Jesus, and he said no. So she went through salvation with this gentleman, and he nodded that he wanted to accept Jesus as his Savior that day. And for me, this is why I flew around the world, was to be a small part in one man's salvation, to be able to be at the right place and just to be God's card for 1 minute as he drew someone into his kingdom. And of course, we didn't have any follow-up, but Joyce said that it was doubtful whether he would make it through the day because his injuries were so great. So I was so touched by being able to go to a foreign place with a card written in English that talked about salvation, and for someone who I didn't know and never will see, maybe in heaven, and to be a part of that process was just beyond amazing to me. So, thank you. All right, Maria.
Hold on a second, I didn't know it was me.
Oh, No, I guess it's done. I'm sorry. All right. We're well rehearsed, can you tell? All right. So this section is doing a little sightseeing. Here we're in Stung Treng. Again, the Mekong River is behind us. Joyce was showing us around her nice little town, and we were having some fun. So next slide. Next slide. Forward. There we go. This gentleman, this is sugar cane, and his business was he would bring these canes. He had a machine that would shave ice, and he was making snow cones with the sugar from raw sugar cane, and that was his business, serving ice cones to people who were walking up and down the river with raw sugar cane. Next slide. No, we got to go forward. There we are. Okay, this man is shaving coconut. You can see the coconuts beside him there. So he had a big machete and he would chop them in half. And that green thing is a grinder. And he would grind out the raw coconut out of these shells. And they were selling not only the coconut itself, but also the shells. And the people in Cambodia don't waste anything. They make beautiful bowls and all kinds of wonderful things out of the coconut hulls. So that was his business at the market. Next slide, please. Oh, here we are. This is Walmart in Cambodia. So as you can see, the streets are dirt. And on the right there, there's some shellfish and some fish and some eggs and some vegetables. And people literally bring their tarps and lay them on the side of the road where people are walking and where the little motos are driving. And that's where they put their produce and their meats to sell for the day. So that's what the marketplace is like. Honestly, you know, when we went to eat at some of the restaurants, we just you have to trust God when you go to a foreign country with what you're going to eat, because sometimes you don't want to know where it came from or where it was before it hit your plate. So I thought that was fun. Also, if you noticed in the last slide, the lady had the orange, we would call them pajamas. And also the wonderful little lady that Maria met up in the Kachak village had little green pajamas. This is dress up. So this lady had her very best outfit on. I tried to find a pair of those big enough for me. I'm not particularly small, but believe me, extra, extra, extra large in Cambodia is still about a medium in the U.S. sizes. So there we go. All right. Next slide. Okay. Well, as you probably know, John, Marie, and I are all motorcyclists. We all have big bikes, and we all ride them and have a lot of fun on our motorcycles, and this is the mode of transportation in Cambodia. Believe me, this was a brand new one, and I wanted to put this in my suitcase and bring it home. They are very, very cute, and they're everywhere, and people there's no one-way streets, there's no stoplights. If there's an inch of road and you want to go there, you just nose your little moto in, and there you go. So this was a nice, pretty, brand new moto, and being guarded by that cute little one there, watching the moto for her mom while she was out shopping. All right, so next slide. This, I'm sure you can't see this, but this was a bush that was in front of the hotel where we stayed. And I took the picture because if you show the next slide, there he is. There's our friend, the praying mantis. Thanks, John. You knew it slipped my mind. The praying mantis was there, and he was about 6 inches long. Beautiful little creature. So you have to have a good eye and watch what you're watching for, because God has wonderful surprises around every corner. Next slide. These little guys are called jingjaks, and they're little teeny lizards, and they're everywhere in Cambodia. They like to climb on the ceilings and the walls in the hotels. Everywhere where we were, there were little jingjaks, and they make a really sweet little chirping, singing sound. I really enjoyed them. So the next slide. All right, you guys. It's Min Men Pi Mop Aha. It's not about the food. Joyce said it's not about the food. But I had to take one picture of food. This was my favorite dish. It's called loklok. It has some chicken or some beef on a bed of lettuce with the rice and an egg on top. Now, the people don't waste anything. Sometimes you'd order a loklok and you'd get some nice chicken breast or some nice chunks of chicken, and sometimes you'd order loklok and you'd get chunks of backbone. So the people just make use of every ounce of everything, and you are grateful for what you get served. The next slide. This was wall art at the restaurant where we were. So this picture is of this little boy with this great big huge snake. So I had to take a picture because I do have pet snakes at my house, and I thought that it was appropriate in Cambodia. But can you imagine if you went to Perkins and saw this picture on the wall? Yeah, probably not terribly appropriate. All right, next slide. This is some of the furniture that Cambodians make. It is extremely ornate, and it's made of this beautiful, beautiful dark red wood. It's a hardwood that grows up in the mountains. Unfortunately, it has been so overforested that there's very little of it left. These pieces of furniture are extremely heavy. It would cost thousands and thousands of dollars to ship them, but they do offer them, and they have them in the homes of some of the wealthier people there. Also, the next slide. This was a mountain lion carved out of this beautiful wood, and this was in the lobby of the hotel where we stayed in Stung Treng. Just beautiful. The people are very artistic, and they pride themselves on much the way that America did years and years ago. You know, they're not mass producing anything. They're really working with their hands. So I was impressed by this beautiful artwork that they did in this wood carving. The next slide. So we were graced with what they called the Thai market while we were there. This was a block down from our hotel, and starting at about dusk, they would boom this crazy boom, boom music all night long. So John was brave enough to go and actually wander the Thai market. The people in the hotel warned Maria and I that if we valued our virtue, that we should probably avoid the Thai market at night. But it was very interesting. You can't really see on this picture, but one of the big lighted decorations that they had was a tank with fire coming out of the end of it, and that was one of their decorations. So it's a foreign country. It's very, very different for sure.
And I always got the room at the end of the hotel closest to the Thai fair. And if you go back a second, that thing in the background that's blue, that is one of their political signs that you see all over the country, where it shows the president and the vice president. It's everywhere. But the Thai market was definitely interesting. You would see a pickup with a stack of mattresses, 6, 7, 8 feet tall on the back of the pickup truck. It was just amazing. So I guess the Thailand is the importer of mattresses for Cambodia.
Okay, Maria.
Okay, next slide, please. Next slide. And this is a river resort that we went to. It was very abandoned, I believe because of COVID and just the wrong season to maybe be there. It wasn't quite the hot season yet. We kind of got there before it got really, really uncomfortably hot. And so we went there and had the place all practically to ourselves. Toilets, you had to walk up this long dock, and it was on the land, obviously. And you'd find the toilet in a little cement building and do your business there and go back to your little hammock. Next slide. This is just one of the little covered areas. You see the boat there. I don't know that anybody was paddling those the day we were there, but we got in the river. Next slide. So here are the hammocks that we got to kind of hang out in, literally. And next slide. There we are in the river. Cecilia's on my right, I'm in the middle, and Joyce is on my left. It was real tricky getting out there. You had to walk carefully. And I had some sort of crummy old shoes I took with me and was able to protect my feet like that. unfortunately, John cut his foot in the river, and we believe that was some of his sickness when he got home, but whatever, because the river's dirty. But we had a great time cooling off there, and Sue also ventured out, but she probably took this picture, actually, obviously, because she's not in it. But it was fun, and here's our picnic. We brought food from Joyce's. I think she gathered up a bunch of stuff, and her and Cecilia, and they packed up a wonderful picnic, and we got to go up there and have a day relaxing after we'd been up to the northeast to Ratanakiri and had done all our ministering. We had a day of fun, so that was great.
In that slide,
yeah.
I said say cheese, and everyone held up a piece of cheese.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. That's right. Okay, next slide. This is at the Women's Training Center, and I believe those were where they colored the silk that the women would weave, and it was quite a process for them to make silk items. This is some Cambodian silk, such as might be made there. And this was a training center, next slide, for women who maybe they were widowed, they had children often. I'm not sure, I can't remember about the men, if they were able to be there at all. We didn't see men really much. Next slide. So that was the women sitting at these looms, and they're weaving these beautiful colors together. And then they would make the fabric, and then obviously the fabric would become something else. But it was quite a long, arduous process that they went through. It would take, I believe, weeks in order to complete one piece of silk fabric. Next slide.
And the silk is imported. They don't grow their own silk. So it was imported from Thailand.
Yeah.
So they have to import all that.
Yeah, this is another picture of a woman at a loom. Next slide. These are the children of the women, and it was wonderful. And I have some video of this, of them singing songs to us. And so they're in their little school uniforms, and some of them obviously didn't have uniforms, and some did, but they were all dressed in their best, and they came out of the school. Their little teachers helped them, and they lined up and they sang for us, and they sang 2 or 3 songs.
3 songs.
Yeah.
One of them was their ABCs, but I don't remember the other 2, but they sang 3 songs for us.
Yeah. So next slide.
Yeah, play the video.
Okay, that's good. Anyway, it was cute listening to them and watching them, and they're all just like all over the place. Here's a weird looking, I guess it'd be a deity. It was a carving that was hanging in the middle of the building where they sold the beautiful silk items. But it was kind of interesting. If you looked up, you'd see this thing hanging down and you're, looking at you. That's Sue.
Okay, well, again, we're all bikers here, so the transportation of Cambodia was very fascinating to me. So as you can see in this picture, here's a flatbed truck, and it's being pulled by a tiny little moto, probably a 50cc little motorcycle. And if you see the tires on that thing, it probably, I don't know how in the wide world that little moto hauled that, but they use these to bring the crops to market, and so something you wouldn't see in the U.S. for sure. The next slide, please. This is called a koyum, and it is a mechanical water buffalo. It is the tractors that they use to plow their fields, to bring their goods to market, and they're extremely long, and they have these very long handles, very interesting little beast to see on the road, and they go about 3 miles an hour. So if you're behind them, it's kind of hard. Okay, next slide. This is just another one. This is a new one that was actually under the house that we stayed in Blanc Village. They just fascinated me. I thought they were really cool. So next slide, please. Oh yeah, so if you're traveling in Cambodia, you better watch out for the cows. So the roads are very primitive there, as Maria was saying. A lot of them are dirt. Even the ones that are paved the paving is really not in very good shape, and you definitely have to watch out for livestock and other things on the road. Next slide. This is a traffic circle. Yes, they have them in Cambodia also. And all the traffic circles in Cambodia have deities in them. This is, again, the seven-headed snake. And this one was in the heart of Stung Treng. Next one. This is a taxi driver, and as you can see, he's taking a break in Phnom Penh. This is definitely a fancy one. Most of the little tek-teks were just the little carts pulled by the motos, but this guy was taking a nap. This is in the middle of a busy street, in the middle of a busy commercial area, in the middle of a big town, and he's just got his little feet up on the back of the seat there and taking a snooze. Okay, next slide, please. This is rush hour traffic in Phnom Penh. These little motos are they're right there. In fact, Joyce was going around a corner and actually nicked one, knocked off a foot peg, and the people are like, no, 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 just keep going, keep going. There's absolutely no way that you can ever stop. Next slide. And here we go again, the same bumper-to-bumper rush hour traffic in Phnom Penh. The next slide. So this just tickled me. So what do you do when you have more than you can haul in your van? Well, in America, we might put it on top, or we might have another vehicle. In Cambodia, they just bungee it on the back. So I was hoping that we wouldn't be behind this vehicle for very long because literally those were bungee cords, and I wasn't sure that that was going to last all that long. All right, next slide, please. Oh, this slide is for Rod Beal and all the wonderful people who've ever worked with power. This is I've got a couple of different pictures. This is electricity in the middle of Phnom Penh. So people who want power just shimmy up a pole. You can see some of the wires kind of wrapped in little coils there. They just shimmy up the pole and they run the wire from the power pole to their little building. And if the power goes out and you don't know which wire is yours, you just run another wire. Absolutely crazy. I don't know how things didn't all burn to pieces, but that's power in Cambodia. Next picture. Yeah, here we go again. This goes right down one of the main streets, just literally hundreds of wires. Next picture. I mean, really? Okay. So next picture. This tickled me. This was a drugstore, and this was their advertisement to come in and get your really pretty pills. Next slide. Here we are. This is the last day that we were there. We're back in Phnom Penh, which is where the airport was. And this restaurant is actually owned by some Christian people, and Joyce took us there. It was actually very Western, and it was lovely. And all the people just ride their motos up right there to the front door, and as long as there's room for one person to get through the door, it's completely fine.
One thing Sue didn't mention, right as we left the airport, across the street, a Harley-Davidson dealership.
There was. Joyce did not see the benefit in stopping at the Harley shop, or John and I would have T-shirts for sure. All right, next slide. So we're back in Seoul, South Korea. We're on our way home, and this slide and the next slide, I wanted to point out a couple of things. First of all, they put a phenomenal amount of effort into the greenery there. Those trees are probably 30 to 40 feet tall, and they are right in the airport. You walk around them. The airport is absolutely beautiful. But as you notice, there's trees, but not very many people. South Korea, the Seoul, South Korea airport is one of the very busiest airports in the entire world. We were there March 1st, the start of COVID, and it was almost completely shut down. Over half of the little restaurants were closed. Some of the shops were closed. Some of the restrooms were closed. There were no drinking fountains available. All the children's play areas were all cordoned off, and there were hardly any flights in and out and very few people. We had an 11-hour layover here. John was getting sick, but he didn't tell us, which is probably a benefit because there were no COVID testing then. But COVID, the word had just hit the market, and everyone was in fear. So the airport was almost completely abandoned at this point.
One of the unusual things about the airport, if you're new, I went to use the restroom, and I was like, this toilet seat is hot. What the heck? And I looked down, and here's all these little buttons to do a variety of things. And it had a little picture saying, if you hit this button, it shoots the water up. So, their toilets are a little different than ours.
Very fancy toilets. Well, they're made for foreigners other than Americans. All right. This whole wall is all greenery. Throughout the whole airport, they had these beautiful plants planted everywhere. These were actually planted in the wall. And finally, our very last slide. Yep, there's nobody in the Seoul, South Korea airport. So that concludes our storytelling on our Cambodia trip. We certainly hope that you've enjoyed hearing the wonderful things that we did. I just want to say a couple of things and then
Let me get in real quick.
give John Maria a chance also.
Sue mentioned that I was getting sick, and yes, I did get sick. My fear was if I say I'm sick, I'm going to get Sue and Maria quarantined with me. So I was freaking out about that, and on the way back, one of the stewardesses asked Maria, is he okay? No.
I said you were though.
It was not COVID.
I had COVID-19, pneumonia, a bacterial infection, and a viral infection.
I thought it was COVID-23.
What?
I thought it was COVID-23.
Yeah, COVID-23.
Okay. So I want to tell you all that missions is for absolutely everyone. As I said in the sermon today, some go, some send, some support financially, all pray, but all of us have an important part. And I really want to stress that going on a short-term missions trip is absolutely for everybody. Don't let fear, age, I'm old. We're all getting old up here, I hate to tell you. And we've taken youth. It's really important to be able to go. Don't let money deter you. We did some fundraising, and I was absolutely amazed. I was worried about finances, but literally with some funds that the church provided from the Elaine Lindquist Fund and selling calendars, we had more than enough money to go and support all of our needs. So if God calls you to go, God's in charge of the money, so don't not trust Him. Do trust Him to provide the funds for you to be able to go. A short-term missions trip will challenge and stretch you in ways you never imagined. Joyce wanted us to understand that it's more about evangelism than it is about doing something. It's more about being. As I said earlier, it's really important to join God in what He's already doing there. It's important to see Him at work in different ways, in different people groups. It's important to have an experience that challenges you. We were not very comfortable. It was hot there for us. It was between 80 and 90 degrees every day, and it was in February. Our bodies were not accustomed to it, and it was the cold season there, and everyone was bundled up in turtleneck shirts and several layers. I was dying, but we're uncomfortable, but that's okay. You got to put your comfort aside. You got to, put on your best face. I mean, there were a few little times when, Maria and I and John and I didn't necessarily see things exactly the same way, but that's okay. God is there, and it's important, and it's not about us. I learned so much from this trip, being able to go and see, learn some language. It's very important if you want to go on a missions trip to learn some language. You need to be able to communicate and not have to rely on your missionary sponsor, to always be there to what's the word, John? Translate. Thank you. Okay, so it will truly change your life forever to be able to go. So I want to say, if anybody who's listening to this has any questions or any interest in missions trip, to call or talk to Cherie Moore, who's head of missions, or talk to John or Maria or myself, and we'd be happy to fill you in. So probably the biggest thing for me in this trip was seeing the man be able to come to Christ because we were there. So you want to do a quick wrap-up?
One of the things that Sue didn't mention, we actually raised more money than we needed, and Joyce wanted to give it back to us, and we told her, no, you use the money here, put it to good use. And Joyce asked us, would you be willing to come back again next year? And our answer was what, guys? Yes, we'll come again. And she talked about doing a summer vacation Bible school type of thing, and we all said, that would be kind of cool, you know. And if we did so, that would be a good way to bring some of our younger teenagers over and expose them to missionary life. So I have never been to a church until I moved to Spokane that did missionary work. And to me, it has touched my heart, and I want to go back. Rod has encouraged me, I'm a Vietnam War veteran, to go back to Vietnam because it's a little bit different now. They shouldn't be shooting at me this time. So it touches you in a way you cannot imagine. God has blessed us to be able to do that here at Garland Church. And we thank you for sending us. We thank you for your support. And we encourage those of you who have not done a missionary trip to do so. So thank you all.
And I just want to say as a wrap-up, I'm just really thankful that I had this opportunity. To be honest, I went because I needed something, and I threw my name in the hat, and only 3 of us did, and so we all got to go. So it wasn't much of a selection process, for sure. But I think it was pretty awesome, and one thing that has impacted me coming back is just being thankful to God for just all the countless ways that He provided for us on this trip. He protected us. Even days before we were going to go, like a week before, we were all seeing this COVID news and how it was breaking out all over the place. And we just felt like we've got to go. Joyce is counting on us. She waited a long number of years, about 8 years, I think, for a team to come. And I just knew we couldn't let her down. And God totally took care of us all, every step of the way. And also just seeing the poverty in that country, it just was really hard. It was culture shock. But since I've come back, now I think about how much water I use. I think about, when I'm washing my dishes, I think about all the things that we saw there. And it just really has impacted me. And I'm just so grateful for everybody who did play a part in our going. And it was just amazing. So I'm really grateful. Akun.